think that I'm right about. That's where, okay, I'm right about there, somewhere like that. So I'm Sonia Lewis, and excuse me, and I consider myself the epitome of a California girl. A California girl in the sense that I have lived in Northern and Southern California, but I grew up in the Bay Area, and I grew up during the time of the 70s. So when I said that I'm guessing that I might be, because I play this game with myself, is a mental thing, I might be the oldest person in the room. I was born in 1971. Anyone born before 1971? See, I told you. I told you. I'm a little bit old. Just a little bit. But I've seen some things. And in seeing some things, especially in education, I like to make sure that I'm applying them in any situation that I'm in and offering assistance where I can. Okay? And so, as a daughter and a student, my parents told me that I was an overachiever. That could be a good and a bad thing. So if you have an overachiever at home, find out what they're really good at, and then, hone in on that thing, because they are going to try to work themselves to death to be good at everything. And we need to know that we show up in our best selves, the best versions of us, instead of trying to be the best at everything. Okay? I was accepted into several top-notch colleges, leaving high school here in Sacramento. I graduated from Luther Burbank High School in the South area. So very urban, exposed to a lot of things. I went off to college. Does anyone know what a historically black college is at HBCU?
I was there once when I was young.
When you were young? So a historically black college and university are these colleges that were built after the slaves were freed. And it was the only place that they can go to college, because all of the other colleges, which were primarily white, they said you can't come here. And so in order to get an education, these institutions were founded. So I attended Spelman College, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. It is still the #1 HBCU on the face of the earth, and it has been for the past 30 years. According to the standards of the rankings of colleges.
Mine was better.
He's going to say his was better. But according to the ranking of colleges, and those people who do those rankings, Spelman has been at the top of that list for the past 35 years. I'm a wife and mother, and so I don't just bring the academic hat into the room, I bring the mommy hat into the room, right? And the mommy hat is important, because us as parents, we have to figure out what's best for our babies, right? I tell this funny little joke. My motherhood journey is 6 + 4 + 3 + 3. So I've had 6 children come out of this belly right here. 6 boys at that. They range in age from 28 to 9. Okay? I married my husband, who's a little bit older than me, and he had 4 children. So that's the 6 + 4. So, Brady Bunch don't have nothing on us. Have you ever seen the Brady Bunch? Right? +3, my older bonus children, their mother died when they were maybe about 10 years ago. And when she passed, she asked me, she said, Sonia, can you do me a favor? You've done a good job with helping with raising the 4 that we share together. Can you please watch out for my other 3? And I was like, absolutely. So that's 6 + 4 + 3, and then 3 more, because my grown bonus children have 3 children. They can't call me grandma, because I feel like I'm too young to be a grandma, and no one can guess that I'm as old as I am, right? So those are my 3 grandbabies, but I can call them grandbabies. They can't call me grandma. They call me Nani. So that's just a little bit about me. 17 years of teaching, turned to an entrepreneur, and became a community advocate. So Ascribe is the name of my company, and we do things just like this, making sure that parents who have questions and want to be engaged in the system feel like they are welcome on campuses where their babies are getting educated. And that's your job and responsibility, and it's your right. Okay? I do this in honor of my 7-year-old self. Because 7-year-old Sonia was a little black girl who kind of was mouthy to her teachers. She questioned everything. it wasn't disrespectful, it was questioning. And so we as adults have to ask ourselves that fine line, identify, is this disrespectful, is this not, right? And help our kids to be curious learners and not just accept everything that they are taught. And accept the authority, unfortunately, of every adult that comes into their presence. Because sometimes we as adults, I'm raising my hands, we as adults get it wrong. As an adult, has any other adult in here gotten it wrong? Especially when it comes to our babies. I have. Okay? So I do this work in honor of them. I don't ever want a 7-year-old little black girl who reminds me of myself not to be heard or seen. I want to remind you that this is a safe and brave space. Safe means that you are protected from, that should be from and not form, or not exposed to any danger or risk, and that you are not likely to be hurt, okay, harmed or lost. Brave is courage. Brave means that you are ready to face and endure dangers and pain, right? Even if it's unpleasant and it's without showing fear. And that's hard because even as a 51-year-old woman, there are things that I say, ooh, I don't want to be afraid in this moment, but this is kind of scary. Okay? And so what that requires in a safe, brave space is that we be vulnerable, that we not pass judgment, that we question. Like, you need to have questions, just like model that for your babies. That you are inspiring growth to happen, not just for them, but for yourself. That you are embracing change. And that we are all in different places in learning. So I want to play this real quick video. This is one of my favorite sociologists. Her name's Brene Brown. And this is her take on what it means to be vulnerable.
Feeling vulnerable and afraid is human. It's when we lose our capacity to hold space for these struggles that we become dangerous. And it seemed to me that that's one way to describe what is happening in our culture and our political life. We have no space to be honest about that, to be vulnerable, to be imperfect and afraid together. And it's become dangerous.
No, we don't, on a micro level as individuals, we're not our best selves in fear, and collectively we're certainly not our best selves when we're in fear. I'm thinking we've grown weary of that. I think we're sick of being afraid. And I think there's a growing silent majority of people who are really kind of thinking at a very basic human level, I don't want to spend my days like this. I don't want to spend every ounce of energy I have ducking and weaving. I don't know where.
Oh, that's why you say you need the plug-in?
No, that shouldn't be. Oh, yeah, that is why. Yeah, we gotta have a plug over here somewhere.
You have an extension cord?
See, those are the things you're supposed to check before you get started. And I said to myself as I was working earlier, oh, I'm good, I'm fully charged.
There's a plug over here.
Is there a plug over here?
You guys found the extension cord? Oh, here, we got something.
We got it. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Good? I know. Thank you.
Will go next. But I really believe with every fiber of my professional and personal self that we won't move forward without some honest conversations about who we are when we're in fear and what we're capable of doing to each other when we're afraid.
Which one do we touch
It's
on?
not just that the things that go wrong for us are part of our wholeness, right? As you described it, the vulnerability is what makes us, keeps us in.
Oh.
But also, that what goes wrong for us is part of our gift to the world. It's what enables us to connect and be compassionate. And I mean, that,
Wow. What happened? Did it turn off? Did it fall?
It's coming back on.
Did it fall?
While we're working, if anybody wants more pizza or water or snacks, feel free, there's plenty. Please eat all of this
the
pizza.
only way to think about, you know, the hard, possibly excruciating up
To each other when we're afraid.
So I just backed it up just a little
It's
bit.
not just that the things that go wrong for us are part of our wholeness, right? As you described it, the vulnerability is what makes us, keeps us in. But also that what goes wrong for us is part of our gift to the world. It's what enables us to connect and be compassionate. And I mean, that's a lovely way to think about, you know, the hard, possibly excruciating upside of the fact that so many of us are struggling and suffering right now.
I agree 100%. I think it points to maybe one of the deepest paradoxes about vulnerability, which is when I meet you, vulnerability is the very first thing I try to find in you. And it's the very last thing I want to show you in me. Because it's the glue that holds connection together. It's all about our common humanity. And when we own our stories and we share our stories with one another and we see ourselves reflected back in the stories of people in our lives, we know we're not alone. And to me, that's the heart of wholeheartedness. It's the center of spirituality. To me, that's the nature of connection. To be able to see myself and hear myself and learn more about myself in the stories you tell about your experiences.
Feeling vulnerable.
So, after showing anything with Brene Brown, I always say take a deep breath again because she can make you like feel like, oh my gosh. And Brene is, you can look her up. She has lots of videos on YouTube. She has lots of books. She's a professor, and she really helps us get through or understand our struggle, right? And not just to understand that we all struggle, but to understand that it's okay. And that's what vulnerability is. Showing up when, one, you don't know everything about what's happening, and you don't feel adequate in those spaces, right? But that it's important to you to be there, right? I say to myself, I've been a mother for 28 years. I don't know too many parents who don't want to be good parents. Now, I know a lot of parents who don't know how to be good parents, but I also want to say that when you know better, you do better as a parent. So my older 3 boys, we call them the original gangsters. They often tease my husband and I about how we now raise the younger 3, and they're called the munchkins. You see how different the original gangsters, y'all tough, we gotta raise you to be the munchkin, right? So my 21-year-old told me the other day, he said, Mom, I heard my 9-year-old brother say something that you would have smacked me in the mouth for. And I'm coming over there to smack him in the mouth because you would have smacked me in the mouth. And I was like, well, I learned that I don't have to smack in the mouth to get my point across, right? So when you learn better, you do better. So that's what all I'm saying here is own what you're feeling right now. And then imagine that was happening for your babies. Okay? I also want to say in this country that there have been lots of things that can be struggle. And when we see each other in our next session, I'm going to show you some other, because I like to look at the demographics in the room and make sure that I am talking to the audience that I'm talking to. But because the struggle that I know is a black struggle, right? Here are some examples of what struggle looks like. 400 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, 75 years of miseducation, 60 years of public lynching, and I would venture to say even more because George Floyd was publicly lynched in 2020. Countless hours of negative media propaganda against a certain group of people. And we can talk about that against every group of people in this country. So remember when I said no oppression Olympics? Because we can get further together than we can independently. And so even though all these things are struggles, they don't define us. Know that every one of your children, even from birth, regardless of what race they are looking, their sight, they're beginning to learn difference. They can learn the difference in facial features, eye color, skin color, hair texture. They're learning that from 3 months old with their vision. Children as young as 2 years are beginning to reason about people's behaviors. Oh, this person shows up like this. This person is the soft, loving person. This person is the angry person based on posture and the way your voice is received. At 30 months, most children can identify race. 30 months. Children at age between 3 and 4 between age 4 and 5 are starting to express racial prejudices based on who the adults are in their lives. 4 and 5. By age 5, Black Latinx children, at least research is showing that they are preferring people who are just like them. So we alienate ourselves in groups that are like us. How young? We're talking about 5 years old. By kindergarten, children are showing signs that the same racial attitudes that their parents have. So if you are at home speaking positively about who you are as a community, they're going to go into the world and speak positively about their race. But if you talk down about your race and other races, they're going to do the same thing. This is what the studies show. And then explicitly between the ages of 5 and 7, when these conversations are being had about interracial relationships, children are picking up those cues. And so again, because I know the struggle of Black people, because I'm a Black woman, and that's easy for me to identify, Blair Imani, who I had the privilege of sharing a stage with several years ago, she said, if Black children are old enough to experience racism, then white children are old enough to learn about it. And so I would also say that when we take out Black children, Latinx, take out Black children, take out Latinx and put poor, take out that and put LGBTQ+, take that and put foster. Any of those groups that are considered the most vulnerable can be put here, because the dominant group, unfortunately and fortunately, it's the country that we live in, and we have to figure out a way to get along and make sure that this mesh. The dominant culture needs to be able to see us. And so I want to just quickly touch on generational trauma before we get into social emotional learning. Because generationally speaking, what you've experienced, what we as parents have experienced, we transfer to our babies. Unintentionally. It's in their DNA. It's not anything that you are doing on purpose. It's something that just happens. So there's this big word, and you don't need to memorize it. It's called epigenetics. And epigenetics simply means that can I use you as an example and come close to you? If she had a broken arm as a child and she Did you? She is going to have a weakness in this arm, right? That potentially can last her a lifetime. That is so funny. That she could transfer that pain to her babies, and if something were to happen to that arm, she can favor it or move back or not want harm to come. So there is this stress signal that all of our brains get, threat detection, and what the interpretation of it is. So that's my hurt arm. So I played basketball when I was younger, and this is my bad knee. And so when I work out now to this day, and I do squats or lunges or anything, this knee gets worked out more than this knee. It's just the way the body, because of the memory, works. And so generational trauma simply means that trauma can leave a chemical mark on your DNA and you transfer it. And you passing it down from generation to generation. And that doesn't just mean your trauma, that means your parents' trauma and their parents' trauma. Think about that. Like, where's your family from? And what did it take for you to be here to this day? What is that trauma? Unintentionally, you've given that as a gift or a curse to your babies. A lot of people will tell you that we are working from a deficit, that we are always in the red. And I am here to tell you that we are a very resource-rich country, community, school district, all of the things. You are the greatest resource that your baby has. And in being that resource, I want you to understand, what does it mean to be resource rich? Anyone want to add, what do you think is resource rich for this school, Castore, in this community? What is the greatest resource that you have? Anyone?
Currently this class.
This class. So having a space like this, Parent University, that's a resource. We are in what?
Library.
The library. That's a resource. You as a parent are a resource. Schools, the building, the structure, the institution can be a resource. Now it takes all of those things working together to say, we got to make sure that the right things are given to our babies at the right time and that they matter. So that's what I mean about resource rich. So we are here today and we have gone through 35 minutes? Yep. And this was the pre-build up to what does it mean to understand and appreciate so that you can recognize in your children when they come home social emotional learning. So social emotional learning, if you look at this wheel here, it is all of our, not just our children need to understand social emotional selves. A lot of school districts around this country, teachers and administrators and staff are going through social emotional learning. I believe that everybody needs to be aware of, because this is self-awareness, self-management, right? So it starts with you. Your social awareness of your surroundings. How do we relate with one another? Those are skills. So this young lady, when I was standing over there, she waved. I think this young man, when he walked in, he gave me a little hug. Because they don't have a fear of relating to, this is a safe space to them, right? Relational skills. And then how do we make decisions based on our self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills? How do we make decisions based on those things? And everybody is not on the same playing field, because everyone doesn't have all of these things mastered. And then let's now take into consideration, this is us, the self, at the center. Now the classroom comes into play. And in the classroom, we have instruction and what that climate looks like. Oh, I don't like that kid over there because that kid learns in a different kind of way from me, so I don't want to be in a group with that kid. And then they might come home and tell you, like my 9-year-old did the other day, Mom, you won't believe one of my classmates asked the teacher for extra homework. We all were mad at her. And I was like, Dad, maybe she wanted to be smarter. And he was like, we was gonna do the assignment anyway, but we didn't have to do it today. We could have did it tomorrow, like she was gonna give it to us. That's classroom climate. Who likes who and doesn't like who, right? I'm sure your babies come home and they tell you things. In the school setting, right? So the classroom is a small little 30, 40 kids. The school could be 100 kids or a few hundred, right? You always have this issue, and principal, tell me your name again.
Leslie.
Yeah. I'm sure every year that they're at the beginning of the school year, I've seen it in the past 28 years just happen over and over repeatedly. You got older kids who kind of want to, like, nudge the younger kids, and they do things to, like, aggravate and agitate, and it might be seen as bullying, but it also might be siblings. Like my kids, my now 7th grader just left elementary school, and he used to tell his 3rd grade brother would come and hang with the 6th graders, and he'd be like, if you don't get away from my friends. And who was the one coming home and telling me who was doing what? It wasn't the other 6th graders, it was my 6th grader doing this to his 3rd grade brother. So that's the school. And then we have our families and caregivers who might feel a certain way about school or the classroom or the teacher or other kids in the classroom. And then you have your community. And all of these things work interchangeably at different levels at different times. And we have to be able to be self-aware. So those are the 5 competencies or the key components of social emotional learning. And if I were to tell you and break it all down, it just means that all 5 of these things are working together so that we make responsible and caring decisions at the end of the day. So when they come home and they tell you they did all their homework, and our social emotional, our self-awareness didn't kick in with those skills, relational skills with our babies, right? If they don't kick in and say, let me see, you'll be stuck like me with my 7th grader who had got a phone call. And he always says, Mom, I give you the best examples when you train. I said, yes, you did. I mention him in every training. It never fails. A few weeks ago, I got a phone call. Idris is missing 6 assignments in IXL, yeah. And so she said, I would love to have him stay after school. I was like, let him stay after school. I love it. So he had 3 days after school, but he's also one of those kids that love one-on-one attention. So sometimes the noise in the classroom can be too noisy for him to process. And so she and I have a agreement now, because now I'm aware and I want to help manage this situation for him. And she trusted to call me, and I trusted to listen and not lash out at her, as sometimes parents do. And they say, you don't know how to teach. I've seen that, right? To help him make better decisions so that the climate in the classroom is better, not just for him, but for all students. Okay? So this is super, super important. And it's been an initiative in California for several years now across districts where they are really stressing. So you might hear things like TSEL. You might hear things like CASEL. And don't let these acronyms and these letters get you confused. They all mean the same thing. Social emotional. We are socially and emotionally involving ourselves and working with others so that we make the best decisions. So, I wrote this little book last year because part of my work, I'm noticing that parents and teachers and even students are saying the same things to me. So remember I said I showed those pictures of little black girls at the beginning? 7-year-old Sonia went to school one day and she refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And in making that decision, I got into a lot of trouble. Back then, they didn't have whiteboards, they had chalkboards. So I would go home with my hands with white chalk all over because my teacher would tell me, write on the chalkboard, the Pledge of Allegiance is the American way. And I would play on the chalkboard and I would practice my cursive, practice my long division. And she would come in and we would extend this punishment because I refused to write the lines on them. So was a little mouthy, and I was a little, I own it. I'm still mouthy, and I still challenge everything. I'm still one of those kind of people that's like, make me do that. Prove that that's right. And what I would say to you, if you have a child like that, go along with their inquisitiveness. My mother did. She gave me that space. So in the book, in chapter 9, I titled it Mama's Fear, because she had this one rule. Don't have that school call my job and have me come off work, because that's going to be less money that we're bringing into our household, and embarrass me. So you better be doing what you're supposed to be doing. So this call wasn't an embarrassment for her. She said to the principal, well, what are we going to do about this to help her be the best student that she can be? And I just was like, ooh, my mama said that, right? So, I'm just going to read the first little beginning of this chapter. My mama's biggest fear was that the slightest infraction would get her daughters removed from school. That her hard work of getting us enrolled in Wilson in the first place would be for nothing. Wilson was quite a distance from our neighborhood, but Mama wanted us to get a better education with better books and an elementary different from our neighborhood that was mostly black. She wanted us to be able to compete with kids of all races along with this opportunity. Mama remarked, I had groomed and provided them with the wisdom beyond their years and just knew that they would excel wherever I sent them. My experience was separate, but not at all equal. I went to schools that were segregated, and she went to school in Chicago, and the schools were segregated. So she went to a black school, and then there were schools all over town that were different. I wanted them to have a running start at a better education. However, I was willing to stand my ground and explain that since I pay city taxes, that my children deserve to attend any school in this district. And she was not backing down on that belief. Mama was my real MVP, my hero, the one who always came to my rescue. And even though there was this fear of something bad happening to us, she was always ready and willing to fight. And I just followed her lead. Mama had convinced herself that the education system was so rigged that she had to be extremely intentional about the way she raised my sister and me. She understood that there were stereotypes about being a single mother, stereotypes about the neighborhood we came from, stereotypes about how much money we didn't make that would limit our ability to succeed in life. Mama wasn't about to be anyone's charity case. Mama just wanted to give her girls a fair chance. And since fair was very subjective, being given an opportunity to thrive was the most important thing to her. Since Wilson wasn't our neighborhood school, she knew the implications and the penalties would be high if something went wrong and we got kicked out. So she showed up. And she made sure the message every day we left school. We went to school in another neighborhood. We were on a district transfer. And the rule was, if you get in trouble, you get kicked out and shipped back to your home school. And she wanted to make sure we had a better education. So when I refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance, she was like, oh my God, this child, we only in the second grade. My sister hadn't even hit elementary yet. And she's like, this is what it's going to be. So she had to learn how to advocate for us. Okay? So that's what else is on this slide is advocacy is you know what your children need. So lean on that. That's your strength. That's your resource. Agency, super important. Know who is going to help you get the solution that you need. And if you don't know, ask the secretary. I say 2 people on every school campus, the secretary and the janitor, know everything. Know everything. So find out who can help you meet that need. Use your voice and use it loudly. Be as bold about how important you feel it is for your child to get a good education. And then leadership simply means you showed up for your child is an example of to other people to show up for their children. And it's the biggest example that you can give to your children to speak up for others. So this is a little activity that I always do. You don't have to close your eyes, but if you choose to, think about your younger self. I always use the example of 7-year-old Sonia. A time when you felt like you were vulnerable and someone didn't hear you. And close your eyes and envision that younger version of you. Now, if you want to, raise your hand if you have someone you can tell that issue to. Would that someone have helped you navigate that situation or get through that problem, solve that problem? Okay. Now ask yourself this question. Has there ever been a time when you were younger where you didn't feel safe telling someone something about what happened to you? A time when you didn't feel safe telling someone and you held that. And we all go through that. There's a point, and I welcome you, open your eyes if you choose to. There's a point where we feel like the adults in our lives are safe to tell everything to, and then something happens, and then we don't. And I invite you, after today's session, to go back and think about that for yourself. Because when we think about that for ourselves, we can imagine what our young people are going through. They are scholars, they are perfectly made, they are bright, they are brilliant, they are showing up with the best that they know based on what the best that you are giving them. And we can't like not make that a thing. Right? And so if you think of yourself in those vulnerable moments and who did or didn't show up for you, be that person to show up for your babies. So I always go back to these baby girls. Every breath we take equals more breaths for them. This is my reminder to myself. Every breath I take, when I close my eyes and think about 7-year-old Sonia, I'm thinking about what would have been best to help her through that situation. Thank God I had a mother that showed up and said to the principal and looked her squarely in her face, what are we going to do about this? Because she wasn't going to accept, oh, your baby's out of here because she refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I luckily had a principal who was just like, we're going to figure this out. And so every breath, take it for your younger self. So I asked this question. Imagine a world where future generations of children don't have to heal from childhood trauma, specifically racialized trauma. And that trauma could be teased for not speaking the language correctly. That trauma can be teased for wearing raggedy shoes. As my 24-year-old who never had a fresh pair of shoes on the first day of school, what he tells me now, because he's quite an entitled young man, different from the way I was raised in the hoods of California, he tells us now, I never had a pair of Jordans. And I was like, shame on us. We never bought no Jordans for you. Go buy your own. Right? But then there are parents who do, and then they have the pressure, right? Because kids see other kids with things. And that's emotional. That's trauma for some kids. Whereas my 28-year-old, he's like, shoot, I had shoes. And I was good. I had a meal every day. I was good. We always had a roof over our head, and I was good. My 24-year-old interpret that completely different. They grew up in the same household, same parents, different outcomes. So here are some tips that I say as a parent, educator, community advocate. I want parents to understand that there is something called a prison to school pipeline, and it is very real. And I always start off with that one because remember that those struggles that we experience, they are embedded in our school systems. sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Because there's a parent university here, and I know the two people from this district care about this student population, they're doing everything to make sure that this is not a thing. But this starts at the cradle. Being othered, ignored, silenced, vilified, or stereotyped is not okay. That othering, that silencing of a certain group, just because you might not speak the language, just because you are new to this country, just because you live in a certain neighborhood, is not okay. Your babies deserve A1 quality education. And oftentimes in scenarios where the deficit is the thing that is centered, there are low expectations. You be the one to raise the bar for your children. The expectation is here. Rita Price, my mother, her expectation was you show up as your best. You are not in competition with Sheila, Yolanda, Jennifer. Nobody. You show up as your best version of yourself. But oftentimes, people in positions of power based on the traditions of our country, the culture of our country, don't see people of different races like us in certain positions, so there are low expectations. I can remember being told as a child, good jobs for you might be a secretary or a nurse, right? Never a doctor or a lawyer or the owner of the company, right? As educators, you are looking for educators that value and hear what's going on. They're taking the time to hear your scholar, your student. They are willing to collaborate with you. So that, remember I told you about my 7th graders teacher calling me? He got 6 missing. She's willing to collaborate with me. She's willing to put aside whatever fear she might have or not. This teacher in particular has had 4 of his older siblings. And so she knows me. And so she's like, Miss Lewis, I cannot believe. I was like, I know Idris is a ball of joy. And he's loud about his joy. But you're going to learn to love him. He is so different from his older siblings. And she concurs. But she says, when I say it's time to get your work done, I need him to understand it's time to get your work done. So she and I are collaborating. I remind him, if you go to her class tomorrow and act the fool, I'm going to come to the school and act the fool. I don't know what that means for him, but for me, it means I might show up in my bathrobe with my house slippers on and my headscarf on my head. That was the fear that I had as a child, that my mother would show up in the worst version of herself. Right? I'm just human. I'm just being funny. Other things you want educators to be on the lookout for is closing whatever educational gaps that your young person might be experiencing. So if they're struggling with something, that is identified early, and we are working to close that gap as much as possible. Okay? And then sometimes teachers drain themselves because they see one specific child that they want to help so much that they forget about the rest of the students in the classroom, and it becomes a drain game for them. Be the help in that situation. As a parent, you are a resource. And then finally, teachers have this bad habit of mothering. They're like seen as the other mother or the other father, but it's mostly other mother because in education it's more female teachers than it is male teachers. But that's, the thing. If you're looking for advocacy in the community, you're looking for individuals who are going to be additional eyes and ears. They are community driven. They want the whole community to do well, right? They are addressing systemic, institutional, and structural things like racism, right? Or social, economic disparities, vulnerabilities in community. They are solution and strategy driven. And they think about doing things outside of the classroom. Like I'm sure here at Castori, are there any after school programs? Are there any community organizations that come in and help bridge the gap between it's school hours and mom and dad are not off work yet, so we might go to this after school community program. Those are your community advocates. Okay? And then things to consider. You want to consider some outcomes that you want for your young people. Like, do young people feel like they're heard and that they're seen, that they're appreciated? There's this notion in this country that children should be seen and not heard. Has anybody ever heard that before? Children should be seen and not heard, right? And I don't think it's just an American thing. I think a lot of countries around the globe, children, you need to stay in your place. I know more than you. I'm smarter than you. I'm more experienced than you. The reality of it is their voices are important. And then, and I mean, I've had these broken down. What are some things that we can do as parents? Students, parents, and then teachers and staff. But there are a lot of suggestions there. Okay? And then I go back to this question all the time. How do we mitigate? Mitigate means we want to stop. We want to end. We want it to be over. What are we doing to make sure that childhood trauma is not a thing? So I'm going to ask that same question again, or it's that statement. Imagine the future where generations don't have to heal from this kind of trauma. One of my favorite authors and psychologists out there, rest in peace because she's now an ancestor, is Audre Lorde. And Audre Lorde, people when they quote her, they say, you can't use the master's tools to destroy the master's house. But what she also said in that statement was, for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow you to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Because if you play the game the way the master plays the game, somebody else is going to be deprived of something, right? So we want to come up with new, innovative ways to change things. It goes on to say, and this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. Racism and homophobia are real conditions of all our lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deeper place of knowledge inside and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lives here. So when we have differences, we want to know what ours are, so that when we collaborate, work with, remember, relations on that circle of our social emotional health, all of us have it. You want to, what's my relationship with others? Because whose face it wears, then the personal, as the political, can begin to illuminate all of our choices. So at the end of the day, if we want our voice to be heard, we got to hear each other out. Okay? And I think that I am done. So there is this, thank you. There's this African proverb that I live by. Many hands, all hands up. Many hands make for light work. One person stand up. One person. There you go. If it's him by himself and it's just his two hands and he's doing all of the work, it's a heavy load. But many hands, all of our hands up, make for lighter work. Okay? Any questions? I thank y'all.
Thank you so much for being here. We super appreciate you.
Absolutely.
And we've got 2 more sessions booked and potentially more to come.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate all of you being here and giving us your support, and looking forward to building on our partnership. And yay, we're allowed to have people on campus.
I know,
again.
right?
It's just like, I started as the new principal here,
Right.
and we couldn't have people on campus, and so you guys haven't interacted with me a ton face to face. So I'm really excited about building that relationship and connection, and it's been such a blessing to work with all your students. So we have supplies for all of our kiddos and for you to take home with you on the tables, and the booklets for you to take home. And we have some book giveaways, right, Mr. Elton, to do as well.
And
And-
I have a book that I was going to donate
Oh, great.
as well.
Perfect.
So, but I need somebody to, we gotta come up with something, or maybe we pick one kiddo, just point to a name on the list, and then we can give a book away to a parent.
Give one of these one.
Yay.
He will volunteer.
Okay, come on, bud. Come here.
Pick a name, pick a name.
Okay, come here. All right, put your finger, pick one that, put your finger on one of these numbers right here. This one. Third one down, Karen Elliott.
Karen
Yay,
Elliott.
Karen.
Right here.
Right here, perfect. And this is for you.
Oh my goodness, that's your book.
That's my book.
Awesome.
Here I was gonna go look it up.
There you go, see?
Yeah.
Yes, and then we will have more giveaways in the next 2 meetings. And then for folks who attend all 3 of our trainings, we have some extra special prizes to give out at that, right, Elton? So we're really appreciative of you all being here. I'll hang out for a little bit too after if you have any questions for myself